we can see the social and discursive construction of our bodies and of the relationship between our minds and our bodies, these two layers of ourselves, and how that mind-body relationship is socially and discursively developed and changed over time, depending on the historical context in which our bodies and minds find themselves. So if we were to exist in ancient Greece right now, we would have a completely different conception of our bodies. We'd be thinking about them and considering them completely differently if we existed back then. People during that time period and cultural period saw the body as a substance to be stylized, something to be shaped and molded by the person it belongs to, and given a style and given a form through one's mind and one's everyday practices and uses of the body. So if you've ever seen any paintings or depictions of life in ancient or classical Greece, a lot of them were very muscular and fit. And that's where the Olympics as a sporting event came from originally. So in that historical context, bodies were seen as something to be celebrated. And there was a commonly shared notion that living a good life, that is a life with value, that's well spent, entails and requires fulfilling the body's potential and constantly surpassing yourself and exceeding previous limits of yourself. And this drove a lot of Greeks to pursue various sporting events and physical activities and a frequent and active fitness lifestyle. It was an essential part of a lot of their everyday lives back in ancient Greece. The Greeks regarded their bodies and treated them like a piece of art, like a sculpture that you're trying to give a beautiful form to through living a good life by eating healthily and taking care of yourself and exercising and all of that. So in this historical context of ancient Greece and classical Greece, the body was seen as a fundamental thing for living a good life, maybe even more so than the mind. The body was at least on the same level as the mind back in ancient Greece. One wasn't considered better than the other. They were considered one and the same, just two different forms of the same thing. But as time rolled on and the ancient Greeks were replaced with other societies across time and space, the mind in commonly held discourse regarding self and society started being given a privileged position and a dominant position relative to the body, which was made in discourse to seem subordinate to the mind, something to be restrained and controlled and harnessed by the dominant mind. This is where the mind-body binary or dualism began to take form and start becoming concrete and naturalized over the course of centuries. And through this discursively and linguistically constructed mind-body dualism, which simply didn't exist in ancient Greece, a binary opposition created them as two separate entities and separated them as if they were foreign to one another, similar to the one/other binary we discussed last week. But like I said in the previous slide, it's not that simple. It's not so cut and dry to just separate, to just sever them like that. There's a lot of interconnection between the two. They're not mutually exclusive. But discourse, that's exactly what it attempted to do, what it successfully constructed in our own conceptions of our experiences of mind and body. We see them as these two separate components. But with the surging of popularity of Christianity in the 16th and 17th centuries specifically, there was a reconception, a refiguration of the body as something to be restrained and repressed by the mind. So the religious discourse of Christianity in Europe at the time propagated notions of seeking salvation in the afterlife. But in the afterlife, your body doesn't come with you according to these religious texts. Your mind within this discourse is often referred to as your soul. They're kind of conflated and made to seem like they're one and the same. And it's your soul or your mind that's lifted up to heaven. And then your body is just seen as your mere mortal coils, your earthly vessel, but not your heavenly vessel. Like it's weighing you down on earth and tempting you with the earthly and bodily desires and passions of the flesh that are discursively constructed as things that need to be curbed and monitored by your mind slash soul and its conceptions of morality, the things you should do and shouldn't do if you want to be a good Christian at the time and go to heaven. A lot of sins in Christian discourse are related to bodily desires, such as thou shalt not covet someone or something, or steal food, or commit adultery. Like these are all things that from the Christian constructed point of view stem from the sinful desires of the body, and they're constructed as being bad things that shouldn't be acted upon. So within this heavily dominant discourse at the time, your mind would have been discursively set up as the layer of yourself, the component of yourself that is in charge with watching over the unruly bodily component of yourself and governing it and disciplining it and going to confessional to absolve yourself of the sins of the flesh in case you ever give in to their temptations. So within this discourse, the body is just conflated with all these negative connotations as something that is very base and barbaric and primal and unsophisticated. Again, similar to what the other is constructed to be in the one other binary. And then the mind is conversely associated with all of these positive connotations and all these higher level transcendental powers and abilities. And then this dichotomy, this separation between the mind and the body into binary opposition with one another was only further exacerbated. Beyond just religious discourse in Europe, it became a part of all academic, scientific, intellectual, and philosophical discourse during the period of the Enlightenment during the 18th century, where it really instituted and institutionalized the binaries of culture and nature. And on the dominant side of that culture-nature binary is culture, with all of the things that are human-made, and including human rationality and logic and knowledge and science and human ingenuity, and all that belongs to the cultural side of that binary. And on the other side, on the subordinate side, something that's made to be dominated by culture and humanity is raw nature and its uncontrollability and unpredictability. So the Enlightenment constructed that binary, and the mind-body dualism, the mind-body binary, kind of overlapped and was just kind of placed on top of that culture-nature dualism, so that the mind was associated with culture and humanity and all those things that were just listed regarding human ingenuity and creativity and control and rationality. And then the body was conversely delegated to the nature side of that dualism. That is the irrational, the uncontrollable, the unbridled passions of nature. All of the stuff that allegedly needs to be studied and understood and controlled and ultimately subjugated by culture and its representative self-component of the mind. So the category of culture and nature, that binary, is constructed so that one is seen as the winner and the other is seen as the loser. And then the mind-body dualism was just placed right on top of that, given synonymous meaning, so that the mind was synonymous with culture and all of the good, positive, winning connotations, and then the body was associated with nature, something that's foreign to us and alien to us, like a force of nature that needs to be controlled by humans and their minds. So as time goes by, we're getting further and further away from the Greek conception of the mind and the body as one, where they're working symbiotically and where one isn't lower or higher than the other. But this alternative conception of how we could view our bodies, we could still readily view our bodies this way, but it's been lost in time and forgotten and concealed over by the notion that history consists of linear progress and that what we have today must naturally be better than what we had in the chronological past. So that the Greek conception of the body is now made to seem alien to us and unrecognizable and not possess meaning within our current discourse compared to the very much naturalized dominant conception of the body as merely being that lower component of the mind-body binary, which is very limiting and restrictive. This is why when Foucault sets out to do his genealogy, to perform his genealogical method of the archaeology of knowledge, he wants to deconstruct topics in our society and our commonly held ideas towards those topics by looking back in time, usually all the way back to the ancient Greeks, because they had radically different ideas regarding those same topics that seemed just as natural to them. And digging into those historical discourses and conceptions of the mind and body could show us how our current ideas are not natural at all, but have changed over time and could change again. Because over the centuries, that mind-body dualism, where the mind is superior to the body, has become naturalized. It's a deliberate historical process in which the idea that the mind is superior to the body is just ingrained in us over and over, from religious perspectives, from intellectual perspectives, and then with contemporary Western societies from scientific perspectives and biological perspectives that just construct our knowledge in a way that makes out the body to be an object of knowledge. So the mind is a subject of knowledge. The body is made to be an object of knowledge, something to be studied by the mind and maintained and controlled and analyzed by fields such as biology and medicine and psychology and physiology. All of these things that further render the body as this animalistic thing that is separate from human reason and needs to be confined as such. So this dualistic idea and conception of the mind-body relationship, which is organized according to binary logic, has become so thoroughly entrenched and naturalized in our ideas of knowledge and truth. And of course, there are power relations embroiled in the discursive construction of the mind-body relationship. And these power relations come into play when it comes to categorizing these things, these experiences in our everyday life, and organizing them in a hierarchy where certain things are made to seem above or below other things in relation to each other. And this biased knowledge, this biased discursive construction of our experiences are inevitably going to affect our social relations and our power relations that are built on top of this binary logic.